Billionaire spots his old school friend working as a waitress. Then this happened. Nathaniel Cross hadn't planned on stopping at the daily grind that morning. His driver had taken a wrong turn off the interstate. Construction had closed the usual exit, and by the time they found their way back to familiar roads, Nathaniel's stomach was growling loud enough that he told Preston to just pull into the next place with a parking lot. The next place turned out to be a chipped paint diner off Route 12. The kind of place with a neon sign missing its G, so it read The Daily Rind, red vinyl booths patched with duct tape on the corners, and a smell of bacon grease that had probably soaked into the walls decades ago. He was 39 years old, worth an amount of money that had stopped feeling real to him around his second billion, and he hadn't eaten at a diner like this since he was maybe 16. Back then, it hadn't been by choice, it had been because it was what his family could afford. He slid into a window booth, loosened his tie out of habit more than comfort, and was scrolling through emails on his phone when a voice he hadn't heard in over 20 years said his name, Nathaniel Cross. He looked up, and for a full 3 seconds, his brain simply refused to process what his eyes were telling him. The woman standing at the edge of his booth wore a forest green waitress uniform with the daily grind stitched in gold thread over the pocket, an order pad in one hand, a pen tucked behind one ear beneath a mess of dark curls. She was maybe 38, 39 his age, and underneath the uniform, underneath the tired lines around her eyes that hadn't been there the last time he'd seen her, he recognized her immediately. Diane, he said. Diane Okafor. Diane Marsh now, she said, with a small, wary smile. But yeah, it's me. They had been inseparable once. In the particular way teenagers become inseparable, when they're both quietly drowning, and only one of them knows it. Diane Okafor had been the smartest person in every class Nathaniel ever sat in valedictorian material. The kind of student teachers wrote college recommendation letters for without being asked. Nathaniel had been the kid whose family couldn't always afford heat in winter, who wore the same 3 shirts on rotation and hoped nobody counted. Diane never once treated him like he was less than anyone else. She'd shared her lunch with him twice a week for 2 years without ever making it feel like charity, had helped him cram for the SAT in her cramped bedroom with a card table between them, had been, for a stretch of his adolescence, the only person who made him believe he might actually get out. They'd lost touch after graduation, not from any falling out, just the ordinary erosion of 2 lives pulling in different directions. He'd gone to a state school on a scholarship and then, eventually, built a logistics software company that had made him unfathomably wealthy by his early 30s. She had gone somewhere too, he'd assumed. Somewhere good, because Diane Okafor had been the kind of person the whole world seemed built to reward. He had not expected, 22 years later, to find her taking his order at a diner with a broken neon sign. "Sit down," he said, before he could stop himself, gesturing at the seat across from him. "Please, just for a second." Diane glanced back toward the counter, where an older man in a stained apron was watching the room with the particular vigilance of someone counting minutes against payroll. "I'm working, Nathaniel. I know." "I'll pay for your time if that's what it takes," he said, and immediately heard how it sounded, and winced. "That came out wrong." "It came out exactly the way you meant it," Diane said, not unkindly, but with an edge that told him 20 years hadn't dulled her ability to see through him. "But I've got 4 other tables, so I actually can't sit down. What can I get you?" He ordered coffee and eggs he didn't particularly want, just to have a reason to stay. He came back the next day, and the day after that. It wasn't hard to arrange. He simply told Preston to route their mornings through Route 12, and nobody in his company questioned why the CEO suddenly preferred a diner with a broken sign over the private dining room on the 40th floor of Cross Tower. Each visit, he learned a little more. In fragments Diane gave him only when she had 30 seconds between tables, and only when he didn't push. She'd gone to college, just as he'd assumed a state school, engineering, and she'd been good at it. On track for a solid career designing water infrastructure systems for a firm in Charlotte. Then her husband, Terrence, had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's 9 years ago. At 31, the disease had progressed faster than any of his doctors expected. Diane had spent the better part of a decade managing his care, his medications, his slow and devastating decline in mobility, alongside raising their son, Miles, now 14. Terrence had passed away 18 months ago. The medical debt hadn't. I had a good job, Diane told him on the fourth day, refilling his coffee without being asked. Her voice flat in the way people get when they've explained something. So many times the pain has worn a groove. I had to take a leave of absence that turned into losing it. This job doesn't ask questions about gaps in a resume. It just needs someone who shows up on time and doesn't complain. I show up. I don't complain. Diane, don't, she said, quiet but firm. I know that look. I've seen it on my sister's face, my mother's face. I don't need it from you too. He didn't push that day, but he didn't stop coming either. By the second week, Nathaniel had done what any man with his resources and his particular kind of stubbornness would do. He quietly looked into everything. Diane's outstanding medical debt from Terrence's care, just under $200,000. Spread across 3 collection agencies. Miles's school, a decent public school that nonetheless had a wait list a mile long for its advanced STEM program. The kind of program Diane had once told Nathaniel, 22 years ago, in her cramped bedroom, that she dreamed of building herself someday. And Diane's engineering license still active. Technically, if she completed a recertification course, she'd never had the time or money to finish. He had a check written out on his head before he even sat back down in that booth. He almost handed it to her on a Thursday, folded discreetly inside a napkin, the way he imagined people did these things in movies. He didn't get the chance. Diane saw the shape of the folded paper in his hand before he'd even lifted it off the table, and something in her face closed like a door. If that's what I think it is, she said, put it away. Diane, you don't understand what this would mean for you. I understand exactly what it would mean, she said, and for the first time in 2 weeks, her voice cracked slightly at the edges. It would mean the guy who used to eat half my lunch because he was too proud to admit he was hungry. Decided 20 years later that I'm the charity case now. I don't want your money, Nathaniel. I wanted my friend to sit in a booth and drink coffee. That's all this was supposed to be. She walked away before he could answer, and for the first time since he'd found her, she didn't come back to refill his cup. He didn't come back to the diner for 4 days after that. He sat in his office on the 40th floor of Cross Tower, staring at a market report he wasn't reading, thinking about a version of himself at 16 who used to lie about having eaten breakfast because he didn't want anyone's pity, especially not hers. He understood, finally, what he'd gotten wrong. He hadn't been trying to help Diane. He'd been trying to erase a discomfort, his own guilt at having so much while she had so little. Dressed up as generosity. It wasn't about her dignity at all. It was about his conscience. So he went back to the diner with a different plan. I'm not here to give you money, he said, the 5th day, sliding into the booth across from her, during the one lull of the lunch rush, when she finally sat down for 2 minutes with her own cup of coffee. I came to ask you a question instead. Diane eyed him warily. Go on. Cross Infrastructure is opening a municipal water systems division next quarter. We've got the capital. We've got the contracts starting to line up in 4 states. And we don't have anyone who actually understands water engineering running it. I have finance people. I have lawyers. I don't have you. He kept his voice level, deliberately businesslike, the same tone he used in board meetings. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job you're overqualified for, that I genuinely need filled, that pays what the market pays a division head, which, for what it's worth, is a number that would embarrass both of us if I said it out loud in a diner. Diane was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. That's still you rescuing me, she said, just with better paperwork. No, Nathaniel said. It's me finally remembering that you were always the smartest person in every room you were ever in, and I let 20 years go by pretending I didn't know where to find you. I'm not rescuing you, Diane. I'm hiring the person who should have had this job before I even thought to create it. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't walk away either. She took 2 weeks to decide, not because she doubted her own ability, but because, as she told him plainly, she needed to know it wasn't pity wearing a suit. She called 3 of his current executives directly, unprompted, and grilled them on the division's actual budget. Its actual contracts, its actual 5-year plan. The way any serious engineer vets a serious job, only after she was satisfied the position was real, that it would exist with or without her. And simply happened to fit her better than anyone he currently had. Did she say yes? The recertification course, it turned out, cost $4,000 and took 6 weeks. Nathaniel didn't pay for it. Diane did, out of her own signing bonus, and told him with something close to satisfaction that she wanted it on record that she'd paid for it herself. The medical debt was harder to leave alone, and in the end, they compromised in a way that let both of them keep something intact. Cross Infrastructure's new division offered a standard employee benefit one Nathaniel had his legal team draft specifically and offer to every employee, not just Diane, covering catastrophic medical debt incurred before employment, structured as a company-wide policy, so it was never about her alone. Diane accepted it the way she accepted any benefit on a standard employment contract, as something she was owed, not something she was given. Miles got into the STEM program the following semester. Not through any favor Nathaniel called in, but because Diane, once her schedule stopped being consumed by double shifts, and worry finally had the hours in her week to sit with him and help him prepare for the entrance assessment, the way she once had for Nathaniel and the SAT. The daily grind is still there. Sign still missing its J. Diane goes back sometimes not to work, but to have breakfast in the same booth. Usually with Nathaniel across from her, the two of them arguing amicably about budget projections or reminiscing about a card table in a bedroom that no longer exists. The old man who ran the diner still tells regulars, when they ask, about the billionaire who used to come in every day for a stretch of weeks, ordering eggs he barely touched. He doesn't know the rest of the story. He doesn't need to. What matters, the way Diane sees it, isn't that a rich man once tried to hand her money across a diner table. What matters is that he came back not with a check, but with a job offer that didn't ask her to be anyone's charity case, that let her walk in through the front door on her own 2 feet, exactly the way she'd always walked into every room before life had, for a while, made her forget she could. The end.